What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to unit number 6, which is on the modern world, which is 1900 to present. This is part 2. Part 1 was on the world wars. Part 2 is on the revolutions, specifically the Chinese and the Russian Revolution, as well as the Cold War. So this is part 2. This is section A. So this is just kind of the intro on the Chinese and the Russian revolutions. So let's get started. Why not? You want to get started? I want to get started. Let's just do this. So here's the deal. The first thing that I just want to mention is similar to the Ottoman Empire. And we talked about the Ottoman Empire, how it fell after World War I. A little comparison here, maybe a little synthesis here. I don't know. So the Ottoman Empire falls after World War I. If you recall, the Ottoman Empire was broken up into mandates, and part of it became Turkey, and the mandate part became run by the British and the French after World War I. Similar to the Ottoman Empire, one of these two other old empires that have been around for a long time. So if you remember, the Ottoman Empire has really been around since the 1400s. The two other empires that are going to fall right around 1900 in the 1900 to present period is Qing, China, and the Qing have been around for a long time, specifically since 1644, and Russia, the Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire has been around for about 300 years. So we have a bunch of empires. These three empires are going to collapse and fall for different reasons, but I want to get into Russia here first, and this is a map of Russia. A little synthesis here. I need a sign to hold up that says synthesis. Just a little review from the last time period. Anything that's color here, going all the way around here, is part of the Russian Empire by 1900. You can see this was the land by about 1700, and then this is the initial expansion of Russia, pretty much under Peter the Great, as well as Catherine the Great. They're seeking out warm water ports. I don't know if you remember this, just a little review. And they're seeking out these warm water ports because they are looking to kind of update or modernize their country because they realize that they're behind. As they liberate themselves from the Mongol rule, they want to catch up to the Western half of Europe. So they're trying to find these warm water ports to explore, to be involved more in trade. And then also during the period of 1750 to 1900, we're going to see this continued expansion. And all of these other colors that aren't in red here down in this area are part of the expansion. They're looking for resources and continuing to look for warm water ports, and we see the expansion of Russia. So in the previous time period synthesis, Russia is trying to expand. Also, if you remember in the last time period of imperialism, Russia tries to reform, and there's reaction to those reforms. So they do emancipate the serfs. They try and build factories. Generally, it wasn't that successful in the terms that they didn't fully industrialize. They had some issues with working conditions, and they have some problems. So I want to get into some of the problems that are going to be around in 1900 and leading up to the Russian Revolution. So one, we have some political discontent, issues politically, whether it is with the military, whether it's military defeats, whether it's with the government itself. Number one is they lost the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. They fight a war against Japan, and this is pre-World War I. Okay, so a little confusion here. Try and keep this straight. The Russian Revolution, we talked about it briefly that it happened during World War I, specifically in 1917 and 18. But we're going to jump back here and kind of focus on Russia. So number one, they lose the Russo-Japanese War. Japan is imperialistic. They're trying to conquer land. Russia's trying to conquer land. The two kind of butt heads and meet in 1905. And Russia loses to Japan. And it's really kind of a slap in the face to Russian nationalism that they lose to Japan. Japan is really just this upstart country. They've just gone through the Meiji Restoration 40 years before, and now they're beating big bad Russia, which shows a lot about Russia. Also, there's a lot of nationalist movements. Remember, nationalism is on the rise before and after World War I, and a lot of people who aren't Russian but live in Russia want their own country. So, for example, people who consider themselves to be Georgian people are living in the empire, and kind of as people are getting their independence in Eastern Europe, they're saying, why are we part of Russia when we're our own people? So they have that to deal with. Also, as World War I starts, Russia suffers heavy losses in World War I. All of this kind of leads to discontent of this guy who is the leader of Russia during World War I, who is Nicholas II. He is part of the Romanov family. His family lineage goes back to Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. Their family has been in power for almost 300 years at this point, since the 1600s. Little synthesis there as well. He is an absolute monarch, and as other countries have given their citizens rights, there is also political discontent that people in Russia haven't gotten these rights. Also, we have social discontent in Russia. And again, discontent is just anger, outrage. Workers, those small percentage of people who are factory workers, which is really like 5 to 10% of people in Russia, we're going to see them protest against these conditions. Unlike again, a little bit of synthesis here. Gosh, this is going to get annoying. Unlike in the Western European countries who created reforms because they wanted to fix these conditions in the factories, Russia doesn't fix these conditions early on, and there's a lot of protests. And in 1905, the same year of the Russo-Japanese War, workers go to the Tsar's palace to protest, and the Tsar's soldiers fire on these innocent protesters who have no weapons, they're not rioting, they're just there protesting, and they kill some of these protesters in a day that's called Bloody Sunday. It was actually on Sunday, and it was Sunday is the day for worshiping services, especially for Eastern Orthodox Christians, and it was seen as very disrespectful, and it kind of gained worldwide news, and it looked really bad on the Tsar, even though he didn't order the firing of the guns on the protesters, and he wasn't even there. He was at a different palace, but neither here nor there. So workers protest. Also, peasants are starting to discuss seizing landowners' land. Even though peasants, or even though serfs were quote-unquote freed, they still are kind of bound by a lot of their obligations from serfdom, meaning that they can't travel, they don't have their access to their own land, they aren't just suddenly given land, so they still are really at their old landlords. They still need to kind of follow what their old landlords are requiring of them because they don't have their own land. So a lot of peasants are starting to talk about seizing their own land. So we got workers unhappy, we got peasants unhappy, and most people are still peasants. Also, World War I breaks out, and we have a shortage of food and fuel. People are hangry. This is one of the common themes in revolution. So as a result of these three things, we have issues. We have political issues. We also have social issues. So workers are upset, peasants are upset, and then World War I breaks out, and we have problems. Over here, we lose a war, we have nationalist movements, we have an absolute monarchy, and we have heavy losses. All of these things are going on in Russia. Also, we have issues in China. So Qing China, just a little synthesis, then refer back during imperialism with the Opium Wars, synthesis. During the previous time period, the Qing dynasty really is split up into what is called spheres of influence. So part of China goes to the British, and part of China is kind of ruled by the French, part by the Russians, part by the Germans, and they're kind of split up. The Qing dynasty is really weak, and with the Boxer Rebellion and the Taiping Rebellion, China's power is decreasing. The Qing dynasty is overthrown. It's kind of a confusing period in Chinese history, so follow along here. In 1911, the last Qing emperor, who was a child, is basically overthrown, and he has no legitimacy. It enters this period called the warlord period, where there's like 17 years, probably a little bit more, of China basically broken up into regional kingdoms run by these warlords. As these warlords are fighting for power and control, there's this political discontent in China increases as well. So a lot of similarities here to Russia. Number one, after World War I in China, there's a rise in nationalism. A lot of people in China fought during World War I. They assumed that they would be free from the European colonists, and they thought the Westerners would leave. The Westerners don't leave after World War I. We've talked about this already, and the Chinese people have an increase in nationalism. A lot of the people who are going to protest this are young people between, I would say, high school students all the way through people in their late 20s. And these are the young people who are going to protest and be kind of outraged at this imperialism. Also, and then we're kind of fast forwarding here, in World War II, and before World War II, remember, Japan invades China, and China is treated very horribly by the Japanese. So we have this issue. And as we're trying to figure out who's going to control China, there's really two different people. There's Zhang Jieshi here, who is also known as Chiang Kai-shek, which is another story for another day of why that happens. He believes in democracy. He's a nationalist. He wants to kick out the imperialists, but he's on one side, and the other side is this guy Mao Zedong, and he is a communist. We'll talk more about him in the next video, but these two guys are both vying for power. And we also, while all this political issue is going on, there's also social discontent. Peasants, similar to in Russia, most people in China are peasants, they're not an industrialized country, are angry at the lack of land that they have. We also have issues from the Japanese invasion during World War II. A lot of the people in China realized there's a lack of centralized government. They weren't protected by the Japanese invasion. They need to do something to solve and to fix these problems. So political, social discontent. In both of these areas, we're going to see communist governments emerge in Russia and China. We're going to see a revolution in Russia. We're going to see a revolution in China. In Russia, they're going to be led by the Bolsheviks, who are going to be Bolsheviks. This group right here, who's led by a guy named Vladimir Lenin, they're going to promise peace, land, and bread. And they get a ton of support as a result of this. They're going to change the name of Russia. They win this revolution, and they are going to start a communist country. So they overthrow the Tsar. They are going to start a communist country, and they are going to call it the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the USSR, also known as the Soviet Union. So Russia officially has their revolution. This is the leader, Vladimir Lenin, and they are Bolsheviks. We'll talk more about this in class. Also in China, they go through a revolution as well. Their revolution is led by Mao Zedong. He is going to lead, for a while, he is trying to escape Zheng Jieshi's forces, and he actually travels like 6,000 miles on foot with his followers, and a lot of his followers die. But as he's trying to escape and kind of hiding out from Zheng Jieshi's forces who are trying to capture him, he actually becomes this like mythical hero. So a lot of his reputation kind of relies on this great march. And when he survives this great march over the course of 2 years, it's seen as really a big deal. And he starts gaining support from the peasants as a result of this. He promises land to the peasants. So similar to Lenin here, who's promising peace, land for the peasants, peace meaning ending World War I, and bread meaning food. Mao is also promising land to the peasants, and the peasants want land. They want land taken away from their large landowners. That's a lot of stuff. We'll go into more depth in class, and in the next one we'll talk about what these communist leaders do in their country after these revolutions. As always, questions, let me know. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.